Chapter 22. Taking turns sleeping in the conference room, Jeff and Lisa worked all of Thursday and most of Friday. By 7 o'clock, the schedule was finished. The applications were collated, the two lists had been merged, and Sherry had even verified everything with each speaker and every school. Alone, Lisa never could have accomplished it, and yet with the army he had amassed for her, that and so much more seemed possible. "So," Jeff said as Lisa put the finishing touches on the poster mock-up on her computer. "So," Lisa said, immediately stifling the yawn that jumped to her throat. Her gaze didn't want to look at him in that chair, knowing the next time she looked, it would be empty. "You want to go get some hot dogs or something?" he asked, as if the fragile limb he was standing on might break. She looked over at him. With everything she had, she wanted to accept, and yet she knew that accepting would put her right back where she'd been the month before, talking herself into believing they had a chance. "I'm beat. You're beat. You've got work in the morning." Her hand clicked to save the document. "I really think we'd better call it a night." Not really looking at her, he nodded. She wanted to say something so he wouldn't look like he understood exactly what she was saying. "Can I walk you to your car?" he finally asked. Knowing she should say no, her heart took one look at him and smiled and said, "Sure." Making each step last as long as he could, Jeff walked with her to the parking lot. There was nothing his arms wanted more than to reach over and take her in them, but he knew that wasn't what she wanted out of this night. It hurt, but he was willing to respect that, so long as she let him walk beside her and didn't tell him outright to get lost. Seeing no other option, he dug his hands into his pockets lest they betray his best intentions and reach out to her. "I guess things are going well at work," Lisa said, bringing up the one topic he knew she didn't want to talk about. "Yeah, pretty well. I start aircraft rescue on Monday." Her gaze jumped over to him. "You're already through the hazmat thing?" He looked at her in surprise and nodded. "End of September." "Oh, congratulations. One more rung up, huh?" It felt like 6 rungs down. "Yeah." "Is the truck running again?" "Better, finally. I thought Gabe was going to blow a gasket before I finally figured out it was the fuel injector." He smiled. Never hurts to know a little about engines. They walked up behind the GTO. "Well," she said, burying her gaze in the darkness at her feet, "I guess this is good night." "I guess." But he didn't move. His spirit had anchored his feet to the asphalt. When she looked at him, it was with unnervingly soft eyes. "Thanks for everything. I would have been sunk without you." "I'm always just a phone call away," he said gently, "if you've ever got an office full of envelopes and no idea what to do with them." She smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." He didn't know why, but standing there looking at her, Jeff couldn't help himself. Carefully, he bent forward, and with a touch on her arm, he kissed her cheek. "Take care." Looking positively bewildered, she nodded, turned for her car, got in, and waited for him to shut the door. "I'll see you." "Yeah," he said, and sadly he pushed the door closed. His gaze couldn't even watch her drive away as he stood there helpless in the face of the end. Work the next day held no fascination for Lisa. She didn't want to work. In fact, she had sent everyone home saying they should have a Saturday off for a change. No, all she wanted to do was sit in that chair and feel him wrap around her. Over and over, her rational side said that she had been down that road already. It led only to heartache, and yet, she asked the walls, if that was true, then what was this hole in her heart that felt so painfully unfixable? It felt like an ache that could sweep her under at any unguarded moment. Everywhere she looked, he was there. Not just in the office, but in her heart and her spirit as well. All she wanted was to spend one more minute with him, one more, and then one more, and then, pulling her knees, clothed in denim, up into the chair with her, she spun the chair, and her gaze slipped to the rain falling outside her window. The first cold rain of the winter with spring so far away, it was merely a promise and nothing more. God, I don't know what to do here. It's like I can't live with him, but I can't live without him either. I was doing just fine, before you sent him into my life. I was doing just fine. I was, not exactly happy, but... Her mind drifted back to those days. However, instead of the take charge can handle anything person she thought she'd find there, all she saw was a woman desperately trying to win the attention and affirmations of everyone around her, and failing miserably. In her mind's eye, she saw herself rushing to the next meeting, zapping anyone who got in her way, and criticizing herself over every little detail that wasn't perfectly in place. Only now did she feel the loneliness that followed that woman everywhere, and Lisa cringed away from her. One small tear slipped over her lash and down onto her cheek. Until him, life was one long string of forgettable moments. But with his entrance into her life, every moment had suddenly become one that she wanted no more than to hold onto forever. "This is insane," she said, righting the chair, wiping her eyes, and standing up. There had to be something more productive than sitting around an empty office crying all day. Gabe had tried to ask about the situation 3 times already, and although Jeff was able to put him off, he wasn't nearly so successful with his own heart. He couldn't explain it, but being with her made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in many, many years. As the clock wound around to 5, he thought about Eve. It would be nice to talk to someone, even if he already knew which side of the fence she would fall on. He laughed softly at that. A small gust, and he could as easily as not end up right beside her on that side. Nowhere, not one single place could Lisa go that he didn't follow her. Not to her apartment, not to the little cafe down the street, not even to the streets themselves. As she walked, the mere sight of the walk sign yanked up the loneliness. Driving, the thought of that clutch and all its inherent problems knifed through her heart. At the park, oblivious to the darkness and the rain, she got out and walked over to the tree as her heart flew with the memory of his kite into the sky. Leaning against the tree as the cold rain dripped around her, she closed her eyes, trying to breathe. The farther she ran, the closer he got, and for the life of her, she couldn't figure out how to run any faster. "I called you Thursday," Gabe said that evening as they sat at the tables long after everyone else had gone on stand down. Jeff didn't look up. His mind was too heavy to let him. "I thought maybe we could hit the racquetball courts or something, but I guess you were busy." Slowly, Jeff nodded. It might help to talk about it," Gabe finally said. "I'm not Ashley, but I can do a mean imitation of her. Now, Jeff, this is what you should do." Frustrated, Jeff scratched his head. "I wish somebody could tell me what to do." "Well, what are your options?" "Homicide or suicide?" Gabe's eyebrows shot up in concern. "I try to make this work and end up killing her, or I don't and end up killing myself," Jeff clarified plaintively. "Great choices, huh?" "Isn't there a middle ground?" Jeff shook his head. "Not that I see." He cracked his fist on the table. If I could just get her out of my head." "Do you really want to?" Gabe asked. For a moment, Jeff thought about that question, and then lifted his gaze. "No." "I love him," Lisa said 2 seconds after the door swung open to reveal Eve standing on the other side of the threshold in a bathrobe and pink slippers. "Lisa, you're soaking wet." Forlorn and trembling, Lisa hadn't even noticed that fact. "What am I going to do, Eve?" Gently, Eve reached out and took hold of Lisa's arm to pull her into the apartment. "First of all, we're going to get you dry so you don't catch pneumonia. Then we're going to get you something warm to drink and have a little chat about making absurdly illogical choices." "I thought I could do this," Lisa said later as she sat on Eve's couch, drinking the mocha-flavored coffee and pushing her still wet hair back with her fingers. "I really did. I thought if I just kept going, kept working, kept moving, that I would forget about him." "You're asking a lot from work," Eve said skeptically. Lisa raked her hand across her damp nose in frustration. "Then he came the other night, and all my plans just blew up in my face. Now all I can think about is where he is, and how he is, and how much I want to see him again." She took a small sip of the coffee, which did nothing to warm her frozen insides. "I can't even think straight anymore. It feels like I'm going crazy." "It feels like you're in love." Lisa shook her head and closed her eyes, laying her head backward on the couch back. "I'm just so confused." "About what?" "About everything. Where I want this to go, why I can't get him out of my head like I've done all the rest of them. I've never seen myself with someone like Jeff. Geez, I've never seen myself with anyone, much less someone like Jeff. I mean, he's sweet and kind and completely wonderful. Yeah, just the kind you want to throw back." "But he won't talk to me," Lisa said in frustration. "And then there's this whole fireman thing which makes me completely nuts." Eve nodded slowly, and Lisa's heart fell when she realized she shouldn't be laying this on the one person who understood all too well. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't—" "No," Eve said softly. "It's okay." She sighed and then looked at Lisa. "When I first met Dustin and he told me he wanted to be a fireman, I thought, oh, cool, saving lives, making a difference, awesome. Later, of course, the fact that in order to save those lives he had to risk his own occurred to me. But by then, I loved him, and there was no going back." "But how did you do it? How do you say, go ahead, put your life on the line every day, and I'll just sit back and hope it all works out for the best?" "Well, I did some of that too, but early on we made a pact to spend every moment we could together. That way, if something ever did happen, we would know we hadn't wasted time being angry with each other over the job." Eve exhaled. "See, a lot of people live their lives taking for granted that they're going to have a tomorrow. Dustin and I never did that. We were thankful for every minute we had together." The words stopped for a moment. "I have no regrets." "But he's gone. Aren't you angry about that?" "I get angry and sad and terrified, but mostly I'm just thankful that even if we didn't have forever on this earth together, we had the time we did. Because of Dustin, I know what love is. I have felt it. I've experienced it. I know the highs it can take you and the lows it can drop you. But I have to tell you, if I had to do it all over again, even knowing what I know now, I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." Lisa shook her head slowly. "I don't know if I can have that much faith." "There are more things in this world than what we can see, Lisa. Like that night of the fire, I'd never been gone when he was on duty before. It was like an unspoken vigil I kept, sitting here in the dark, waiting for that door to open the next morning. Then my company wanted me to go to Dallas that weekend. I didn't want to go, not because of me, but because of Dustin. But he wouldn't hear of me staying here. I had to take the next step up. And if going to Dallas would help me do that, then that's what he wanted me to do. He took me to the airport, and right before I got on that plane, he took me in his arms and he told me that he loved me forever. I can't explain it, but I think he knew." "You never got to say goodbye," Lisa said with understanding. Softly, Eve smiled. "We didn't have to. It was never goodbye with me and Dustin. It was always until I see you again. That was Dustin's idea because I had such a hard time when he'd leave at first. So we didn't say goodbye. We always said until I see you again. And it's true, too. I know there'll be a time and a place somewhere down the line that fires don't happen and people don't die, and we'll be together again. Until then, I know his love is with me every day." In theory, it sounded so good. In reality, it sounded more difficult than anything Lisa had ever done. "You have to learn to let go," Eve said. "Life will take its course with or without you grabbing the wheel and trying to force it to be one way or the other. All that does is make your arms hurt. Let go and trust that whatever happens, it's for the best." "That was for the best? Dustin dying?" "From my little perspective, it doesn't always feel that way, but I don't see the bigger picture either. I have to trust that in the bigger picture, it makes sense, that it was for the best. He was lucky to have you. We were lucky to have each other." A soft peace slid into Eve's eyes. "Think about it, Lisa. You may not have tomorrow. Do you really want to spend the time you do have pushing Jeff away?" In the middle of her heart, Lisa knew Eve was right. If he died tomorrow, what would she have gained by not being with him today? Would it make the cut of his loss hurt any less? When Eve smiled and said it was time for her to get some sleep, Lisa nodded, thanked her, and then curled under the blankets on the couch. No, she decided as the questions ran through her again. If he died tomorrow, she would regret every single second she had spent keeping them apart. Every single one. As a peace offering and to say I'm sorry for not being here for you like I promised, Jeff stopped off at a flower shop on the way to Eve's Sunday morning. She wasn't expecting him until noon, but the night at the station, minus his brain, had been quiet. He had gotten enough sleep. What he needed now was to talk to someone who could make his heart believe he was doing the right thing by staying away. It didn't feel like the right thing, no matter how many times he tried to explain to himself that it was what she wanted. At the apartment, he grabbed the yellow rose from the seat, ran his fingers through his hair, and took a breath. Seeing Eve, understanding the pain he was keeping Lisa from, would be exactly what he needed. That would be enough to make his decision solid. Of that, and only that, he was sure. On the doorsteps, he checked his watch as he reached over and rang the doorbell. 7:38. He dug a hand into the denim and brown suede jacket pocket and waited. No answer. Again, he reached over and hit the doorbell, listening this time to be sure it had rung on the other side. "I'll get it," he heard the voice in the second before the door swung open. Wrinkled t-shirt, faded jeans, sleep still hanging around her, Lisa stood there, and his breath snagged. For 6 whole seconds, all he did was stare. "Lisa? What?" Her eyes widened in total shock. "Jeff, what are you doing here?" Slowly, her gaze slid down from his eyes, to his shoulders, to the rose in his hand. Awkwardness dropped over him. He tried to smile, but it fell halfway to his face. I didn't know you were..." He looked past her into the apartment. "Is Eve here?" At that moment, Eve strode out, hair up in a white towel, white bathrobe, and pink slippers. "Who is it, Lise?" Lisa said, as though she couldn't quite decide if it really was who she thought it was. "It's me," Jeff said, carefully stepping into the room as scenarios of how and why Lisa was standing on that doorstep raced through him. I thought if I came early..." One thumb ran down the length of his nose. He glanced at Lisa, a move which took his heart to his shoes. "I didn't know you were going to have company." Eve laughed. I didn't either. She turned and went into the little kitchen. I only got enough donuts for me. I didn't know I was going to have a party. She threw the little box onto the table. But you're welcome to them. There's milk in the fridge. I'm just going to go get ready. With that, she turned the corner to the stairs and disappeared up them. Oh, man, I'm sorry, Jeff said, breathing the words more than saying them. If I would have known you were... No, Lisa shook her head quickly. It's me. I didn't tell Eve I was coming. I just showed up. He wished there was some sensible words to ask her why. Nice flower, she finally said, nodding at it. When he looked down, he hardly saw it. Oh, yeah, I brought it for Eve. I thought she probably hasn't had some in a while. He was having trouble breathing and swallowing and thinking. Lisa nodded. I can put it in some water for her, if you want. Slowly the rose came up, and he handed the stem over to her. He watched her take it, and he followed her past the little table into the kitchen. There he leaned on the counter and put his hands in his pockets. So you've been here all night? Since about 1, Lisa said, and concern traced through him. Watching her was like watching his soul, and yet not being able to touch it. She was busy getting a vase and filling it with water. Eve didn't tell me you were coming. Yeah, he scratched the side of his ear. Well, I wasn't supposed to be here until noon, but she mentioned church, and, well, we had a good night at the station, so I thought maybe it would be a good idea to just come on over. How good of an idea that was, he couldn't really tell at the moment. Perfect, Lisa said, turning with the rose positioned flawlessly in the little vase. She set it on the table and sat down. Pulling her foot into the chair with her, she looked up at him. Absolutely, his brain said, looking at her. So, were you planning to stay all day? I don't know. I hadn't really planned anything, Lisa said. The waves of her hair drifted down around her face. You? For a while. I was going to take Eve out to eat or something, spend some time with her. Lisa nodded, then reached over and popped the donut box open. Want one? He shook his head. At the moment, his stomach was in too many knots to eat. I'm not really hungry. Silence descended between them as Lisa set the box back down. She didn't bother to take a donut either. So, how's work? He finally asked, fumbling for something to talk about. Good, she said softly. Thanks to you. Her gaze swung over to him as she shook her head. I still don't know how you did it. Did what? Got my employees to be competent for a change. His face fell in confusion. I didn't do anything. Yes, you did. When it's me, they couldn't put one foot in front of the other without falling over themselves. With you, they're like, brilliant. I don't know how you do that. I trust them, he said gently. She seemed to coil back at that statement. I trust them. No, he said carefully. You expect them to make a mess of things, and so they do. Besides, they know it'll never be good enough for you, so they don't bother to do it right. But that's their job. It's not about the job. It's about trusting someone else to handle something. Her gaze dropped to the table. Trusting isn't really my strong suit. Doesn't mean that has to be true forever. Take Sherry. She came up with that database in about 5 minutes. Would you have let her do that for you? Or would you have done it yourself, figuring she couldn't do it right? There was no answer. See, Lisa, it's not a question of letting them do it poorly. It's a question of trusting them enough to make them want to do it right. Right now, you've set it up so they don't own their work. You do. It all comes back to you because if they screw up, they know you'll fix it. But it's my company. And you have every right to run it the way you want. But as long as you run yourself into the ground fixing their mistakes, they're going to let you. Lisa thought about that a long minute. Well, How do I not make everything mine? Little steps, Jeff said. The first time I walked on duty, do you think they put me in charge of a call? No way. They gave me one job to do. I did that job. I learned that job, and when they knew I could do that, then they started shifting me around to the other jobs. I'm not ready yet, but one day I want to be the one running a call. It's not all or nothing. There can be steps along the way. Steps along the way. 3 forward, 4 backward. That's what it felt like with them. But at least this was better than avoiding each other at all costs. Don't tell me you don't like donuts, Eve said, turning the corner from the stairs, and Jeff's gaze snapped up to her. Fully dressed, hair done, and heels on, she looked the epitome of the fashion industry he knew she so loved. Dustin would have been in awe as always, and Jeff smiled at that thought. Jeff straightened with a knowing look Eve gave them. What time did you say church was? 9. Eve pulled a sugary pastry out and took a bite. Well, if you're not going to eat them. Slowly Lisa stood, and Jeff wasn't sure that he liked the sadness in the hunch of her shoulders. I'd better get going. He nearly moved to stop her, but at the last possible second, he held the protest back. Oh, you don't have to, Eve said, nearly choking on the donut piece in her mouth. You could go with us. However, Lisa shook her head. I've got some work I've got to get done. On Sunday? Eve asked in horror. Yeah, Lisa said, and Jeff's heart fell at the thought that they wouldn't get to spend the day together. Lisa went into the living room and gathered her things. Thanks for everything, Eve. Sure, girl. Leaving the donut on the table, Eve went to Lisa and put an arm over her shoulder. Any time. Eve's gaze lowered. Think about what I said, okay? In slow inches, Lisa nodded and then backed away. The fight to keep the tears and emotion at bay was obvious. So was her intention to get as far away from him as fast as she could. I'll see you later. Drive carefully, Jeff called after her as she stepped out the door. His heart splintered the words across the pane in the final look she gave him. Who could focus on anything? Lisa asked as she drove back through the streets now kissed by the golden sun of autumn. Driving, breathing, living, it all felt so hard. Everything had felt so incredibly hard since that phone call. Yes, that phone call had changed everything for her. Yet what had it really changed between them? The illusion that she was in control? Her fingers gripped the wheel white-knuckled. Facing that realization pulled her ego to its knees. Yes, it was true. Until that moment, she had believed she had the power to guide where she was going in life. Since that moment, she had been rudderless, adrift in an angry sea that was bent on pulling her down into its depths. But I don't know how to let go, she pleaded. I don't know how, God. However, God was apparently busy because there was no answer. In frustration, she reached down and flipped on the radio. He doesn't call you to understand everything in every moment, the preacher on the radio said, with that same lilt that all preachers on Sunday have. Frustrated, Lisa reached for the button. When Peter stepped out of that boat, do you really think Christ required that he understand how it was happening? How he was able to walk on water? Lisa's hand slipped back to the steering wheel as her heart tripped over the words. No, all Christ said was come. All Peter heard was come. And he did. As long as Peter kept his eyes forward on the God who loved him infinitely and would never allow the winds and the waves of doubt to overcome him, as long as Peter did that, those waves had no power over him. It was only when Peter stopped looking at our Lord, it was only when he looked down at the waves, and only when he saw the wind. It was only when he stopped trusting Christ and started trusting his own understanding and his own power that he began to sink, and he cried out, Lord, save me! Of course, you know the story. Jesus stretched out his hand. He took hold of Peter, and what did he say? "O ye of little faith, why did you doubt?" That's where the story stops, and we chide Peter. Why did you doubt? Christ was right there. He would have kept you above the waves if you would have just what? Not tried to handle the situation on your own? But don't we all do that? Don't we all look around and freak out because the wind and the waves are too much for us to handle alone? Of course they are, but they have no power if we keep our eyes on the Christ standing before us, and in every moment, Christ is always before us. He is already there, where you fear to go. He is already there, and He has made it safe for you to pass. But instead of looking at Him, instead of trusting Him, we look around and we see the wind and the waves pulling at us. They throw us off balance and threaten to drown us. It's when we think we have to handle all those things on our own that we begin to sink in doubt and fear, and we cry out, "Lord, save me," just like Peter did. But the truth is the same for you as it was for Peter. All you have to do is keep your eyes on the Christ before you, the Christ who loves you infinitely and would never allow the winds and the waves of doubt to overcome you. When you do that, the waves, the winds, they have no power so long as you keep your eyes on Him and His plan for your life. So then, the question is, when He says, "Come," what is your response? Do you instantly look at the wind and waves and say, "No way, how can I? Are you crazy?" Or do you step out of that boat and walk toward Him with confidence, knowing He will take care of everything else? Lisa's chest felt as if the air had been going in, stacking on top of itself until there wasn't room for any more. What had Jeff said about small steps, about trusting? What had Eve said about letting go? In different words, they were all saying the same thing. She, the perennial ice queen who could handle everything on her own, was kidding herself that she was going anywhere on her own power. No, she was stuck right where she had been all those long years before when she had vowed that, unlike her mother, she would never fall into the trap of needing someone so much she couldn't let go, and then have them let her down anyway. That vow, so sensible at the time, had cost her time. It had cost her being close to anyone, letting anyone get close to her. And it had nearly cost her a life with the man she loved. Of course, one decision didn't banish all the other doubts, but if she kept her gaze on God's plan for her life, instead of on the waves and the wind around her, His power could become hers, and together... "Okay, God, I'm ready. Show me the first small step," she prayed, and for the first time in a forever of prayers, she felt like someone had actually heard. "You're awful quiet," Eve said as she and Jeff sat by the big bay windows of the restaurant. Then she smiled. "Not that you're ever very loud." The words running through Jeff's head pulled thoughtfulness to his face. "I was just thinking about what the guy said in the sermon today. You know, about how if Friday had been the end, then the cross would be a symbol of tragedy instead of the symbol of hope." His fingers went up and drifted across the metal cross at his chest. "We always want it to be Sunday, don't we? We don't want to go through the Fridays of life, but the resurrection of Sunday would mean nothing without the tragedy of Friday." "I don't think I'd ever thought about it like that either," Eve said softly. "I kind of feel like I'm at Saturday now, waiting, not knowing what's coming next. Sometimes I think what's coming will be Sunday, and sometimes I'm afraid it's going to be another Friday." Jeff nodded. "I've been at Saturday so long, I'm not sure I'd even recognize Sunday anymore." He held up the cross. "Mom gave me this." "At the academy," Eve said, and Jeff nodded. "I take it she wasn't thrilled about the fire department thing." "No, she didn't understand. She thought I had a death wish." He shrugged. "Maybe I did." "What does she think now?" He breathed in the question. "I don't know. I haven't seen her since she left that day. I thought it'd be easier for her if I stayed away." Eve twirled her fork on her plate, although she didn't seem to see the food there. "How would that be easier?" Jeff wasn't eating much either. Food had lost its allure. "That way she wouldn't have to think about me every day and remember everything she's lost." "Your dad and Kit?" Slowly he nodded. "She blamed me for it." "No, she didn't." It would have been nice to believe that, but he knew better. Yeah, she did. But even if she hadn't, she should have. I killed the two people she loved most in this world. I did, and she never forgave me for that. He sat back and closed his eyes against the pain that admission brought up. If I'd just put those dumb rags away like she told me to, why was that so hard? But no, I had to throw them on the bench like a spoiled little brat. Kit could go to the party, I couldn't. It seemed like such a big deal at the time. Now... There was only softness in Eve's eyes. "You were a kid." Anger slashed over him. Yeah, a kid who should have known better, a kid who did know better. Oily rags and a water heater flame don't mix. I knew that, but that wasn't what I was thinking about. Not to even mention that propane tank Dad had told me to move 6 times already. Jeff sighed softly. But I was too busy as usual with my own life. Too busy to worry about little details like that. And then Mom was left with me. The one who didn't have the funny stories to tell. The one who couldn't tell a joke to save his life. The one who was a terribly poor substitute for her favorite. "Jeff." "It's true." He stopped her protests with one look. "It is. Do you know she didn't get to tell them she loved them? She didn't. She told me that one night, that all she wanted was to hear them say it and to be able to tell them one more time that she loved them. I took that away from her, and because of my stupidity, she'll never have that chance again." "And what about you?" His eyebrows furrowed. "What about me?" "You're still here. Why doesn't she tell you she loves you?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. "Jeff?" She'd never bothered to before. Why would she strain herself now? "But..." "I never quite fit into her plans," Jeff said, his gaze settling on his fork with the admission. "She was supposed to go back to work after Kit, international finance. That was her dream. She was on the fast track to being the vice president of her company. Then she got pregnant with me, and her whole life changed. I guess she had a lot of trouble because she was in bed for like the last 3 months of it. When I finally got here, I was a pretty sick little kid. If it made you sick, I caught it. We were in the hospital more than we were home. Daycare was out, so finally her work had to find someone else. Eventually, I grew out of that, but her career was shot by that time. I can always remember Dad trying to make me not notice how she felt about me. He'd take me out to do things, fly kites, fix cars, but I knew. It wasn't hard to notice. On Saturday mornings, I'd hear them in the kitchen all laughing and talking, and I'd know that the second I stepped through the door, the fun would be over." His gaze never lifted from the table. "Then I burned the house down, and as bad as it was before that, things were worse after. She'd scream at me for every little thing. If supper wasn't ready on time, or if I left my car too close to the fire hydrant, or 100,000 other things. I tried, but..." He exhaled. "I went to business school. I thought that would make her happy. Dad always said he wanted his sons to graduate from college. Kit never got that chance, so I went, even though I didn't really want to. That day I stood on that stage, I looked out across that whole auditorium of thousands of people, and there wasn't one face out there I knew. Not a single one. He laughed softly. She still wouldn't know about what I'm doing now if it wasn't for Dustin. The letter. Jeff nodded. I think he wrote more of it than I did. I never would have had the guts to put it all on paper. Honestly, I figured she'd trash it the second she got it anyway. His thumb traced over the cross. She told me to tell them not to call her if something ever happened because she couldn't handle another funeral. Then she gave me this, told me good luck, and left. I haven't seen her since. You know she thinks about you every day. I doubt it. And every day she wishes she had done things differently and that she could have another chance. Yeah, right. And you know this how? Eve looked at him. Because I know how it feels to push away just when you need to be there the most. In the darkened apartment, as the lights from below traced across his ceiling, Jeff lay watching them. One day their time on this earth would come to an end. There was no surer bet in the world. She would leave him, or he would leave her. But regardless of the circumstances, the opportunity to say those words would forever be gone. How many times had he wished that Dad or Kit could come back for one moment and give her what she so desperately wanted? Yet his own heart wrapped around those words like a dog hoarding food. True, she had never said them to him, but he hadn't said them to her either. If the opportunity evaporated before his eyes, would it be her he blamed for that? Or... His gaze slipped over to the clock. It was late, and yet how much later was it getting with every tick of that clock? Would he have tomorrow if he didn't take the chance tonight? Pushing the idea ahead of him, he swung his legs out of the bed and dragged them through the hallway to the phone on the counter. It was one phone call, and yet it was so much more. A slow button at a time, he dialed the number and waited through the rings. When it clicked, his heart clicked with it. Hello? Time froze around that voice. Mom? He fell through the word, his heart plummeting ahead of him. It's Jeff. Jeff, what's wrong? He heard the concern flood through her voice. Nothing, he said softly. I just wanted to call and tell you that I love you. The words rang on the wires between them, followed by a long moment of utter silence. Oh, well, I love you too, she said slowly, with surprise lacing the words. Where are you? At home. Another long moment of silence. Are you still with the department? Yeah, I still am. Oh. His brain fought for something to say. Are you still liquidating estates? She said slowly. It keeps me busy. He wound an elbow up to the countertop. How are you? Good. I'm going on a trip to San Marcos with some friends next week. Oh yeah? That sounds like fun. Yeah, it does. The wires buzzed loudly between them. For a long moment he waited, thinking, hoping that she would ask about him, but finally she said, Well, I'm sure you've got other things to be doing. I'd better let you go. Yeah. The word hurt, I guess. Take care of yourself, okay? I will, he said, willing strength into his voice. You too. When he hung up, the center of him ripped in two, and he laid his forehead on the corner of the wall. She could do that, just hang up and go on with her life. She could, but somehow he couldn't. He needed someone he could love, someone who could love him in return. He needed that, and of every single person on the face of the earth, there was only one person who fit that description. Closing his eyes, he picked up the phone and dialed the number. He had to swallow the protests in his head. Strength was in the asking. Courage was holding out a hand and trusting that she would take it. Faith was believing that Sunday would follow Saturday, as Saturday had followed Friday. If only you held on to the hope long enough. The phone clicked. Hello? Lisa? Hi, it's Jeff. I need to see you. This has been To Protect and Serve, Volume 1 of the Courage series. Written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings. This has been a Braveheart Audiobooks production.
You don't want to miss what comes next. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.